Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? I want to give you all a very warm welcome to this event. I must say it's quite emotional to see so many people of you here, so many friendly friends. As you know, this is a very special occasion for us. I mean, we do events a lot, but this event is celebrating, it's marking our 15th anniversary as an organization. And as you know, fighting for justice is not something that we can do by ourselves. It really requires a community. It requires we do it together. So seeing so many faces that we know, friends, colleagues, supporters, makes it very special so that we can celebrate together. And that we also have this opportunity to see you here, to thank you also for your collaboration. So I think I need to say that this event is also live streamed. So I also want to say hi to the people who are following us on the live stream. And yes, so very welcome to this event. Perhaps for those of you who don't know us, we are from Impunity Watch. Impunity Watch is a human rights organization. And what we do, our mission really is that we fight for justice, that we support those victims, affected communities, survivors who have suffered unspeakable crimes, who have gone through serious human rights violations, so that we support them in their fight for justice and also in uprooting structures of impunity. Structures of impunity, as we know, work to protect the very powerful interests of powerful groups. They make it impossible to uproot structures of impunity, of root causes of violence. And they also perpetuate structural violence and structural injustice, past, present, right? So it perpetuates in the present. And so for us, if we talk about fighting for justice, we also talk about combating impunity. It goes really hand in hand. So Impunity Watch exists 15 years. That's the birthday that we are marking. And if we look over this past 15 years, I think it's quite astonishing what we've achieved. And if you see, you know, we're now having really deep partnerships with partner organizations, with affected communities, with victims, with survivors on the ground in many contexts in the world. And what we try to do is really be on the grassroots level with these partners, trying to fight side by side so that their voice for justice is being heard, and so that we can work on justice processes that are meaningful for victims and for those survivors. I think also perhaps to recall the origins of Impunity Watch. So Impunity Watch origins are in Guatemala. And so many years ago, the peace process had happened in Guatemala, and victims of the genocide there, victims of really unspeakable crimes in that country, came to us and they said, we have a peace process, but we don't really see that something fundamental is changing. Structural causes of racism, of exclusion, of injustice were kept in place, and they were being left alone, so their voice was not being picked up. And so they asked us if we could support them to bring across their voice and to help them in this fight for justice and against impunity. So that's where it started. And then from there we moved to the Western Balkans. From there in 2010 we started a program in Burundi. And in 2016 we also opened a program. We started a program in MENA, so on Syria, Iraq and Tunisia, working with partners there. And since a couple of years, now 2 years, we are also present in the DRC. So as you know, these are very complex contexts. And so working there on justice in conditions of deep poverty, where there's deep injustice for the victims, is quite challenging and very complex. And so I think it's also fair to say, right, that we can talk about successes, but what does a success mean in this context? We can make a success one day, the next day it can be overhauled. And we know success is not a linear process, it comes with back and forth. So it's important that in this fight for justice, you know, we keep our inspiration, that we remember what we do it for. And I think there it's really the partners, it's the victims, it's the survivors that give us that inspiration, that give us that drive to go on. And it's impressive, I would say, you know, that if I look at the partners that we work with, that they have such a lot of courage, but also a vision and a clarity and a determination to go on. And I think what is really important to remember, and I think that's what we celebrate at Impunity Watch, is that alternatives are possible to the status quo. Sometimes contexts make us believe that change is not possible, that the world is very cynical, but victims really give us hope. And so for us, this celebration here together with you is a very important moment also to thank our partners for their work, for their courage, for their determination, and for giving us this hope that the world can be different. So I think that if as Impunity Watch we speak about celebration, then it's also fair that we give them a voice, right? That we use this platform also to give a voice to victims. So what we did, thinking a little bit about, you know, what serves a celebration, is that we asked our partners with whom we work if they could imagine what a world without impunity looks like. And I think that can serve as for inspiration and a reminder of why we are here and why this fight for justice is so important. And so I would like to start with showing you a small video in which we show you the voices of what our partners have to say.
العدالة هي محاسبة الطغاة ببلدي وبكل العالم مشان يكونوا عبرة للأجيال القادمة. العدالة لشعب طلع وطالب بحريته يبقى ببلده بقراره وبخياره. العدالة يسمع العالم أصوات الناجين والأهالي المعتقلين والمفقودين والمخفيين ويحترم رأيهم رغم تنوعهم.
Un monde sans impunité pour moi, et ce que je prône toujours chez Africa Reconciled, c'est un monde où on respecte la dignité humaine. Et que celui qui ne respecte pas la dignité humaine, il est poursuivi par la loi.
العدالة قاعدة اجتماعية أساسية لاستمرار حياة البشر مع بعضهم البعض. تساهم العدالة في كسر دوامة العنف والجرائم واستعادة سيادة القانون والثقة بالمؤسسات الحكومية وبناء مجتمعات قوية وقادرة على وأد الانتهاكات الجسيمة لحقوق الإنسان قبل وقوعها.
Que si no hay justicia, si el Estado no reconoce las grandes atrocidades que cometió contra nuestro pueblo o que queda en la impunidad, no habrá paz, no habrá justicia.
Personnellement, rendre la justice possible et efficace, c'est que moi-même, je puisse en tout lieu jouir de mes droits, mais aussi être capable de remplir mes devoirs vis-à-vis de ma communauté, vis-à-vis de l'État. Donc, la justice, ça commence par moi.
نحن مكملين لنضمن عدم وقوع ضحايا مفقودين جدد. نحن مكملين لنساهم ببناء دولة العدالة والقانون لينعموا فيها أولادنا وأولاد الوطن.
تعمير العدالة هو محاولة نزع كل التخوف هذا المسار. هي محاولة أن يعيش كل إنسان باستقرار واطمئنان وعلم الاطمئنان باستقرار وعلم مشاعر ومتوحش ويصعب العيش فيه.
So I think that gave you an impression of what partners have to say, what victims have to say about what justice means. And I think especially here for an international community, is it important to note that when victims speak about justice, it's not just about legal approaches, right? It's not just about criminal justice, but it really means different things. And what justice means that is meaningful for victims really depends on the context where they come from. It depends on the experience that they've had. It depends on the background people bring in. And so for us at Impunity Watch, it's really important that we take this into account, that we listen to victims. What does meaningful justice really mean to them? And how can we support them? How can we develop processes long-term that help them to make steps in that direction? So I think that's one thing that you can take from this video. Another thing, I think, it's really the courage and the clarity of victims. But perhaps above all, I think it's the humanity. You know, it's the human dignity, and it's really that humanity that drives us. And I think that gives us strength and solidarity in how we move forward. We have here in the event a lot of the staff of Impunity Watch in the Netherlands. They've come from all over the world. They work in a very different difficult context. And today we had a meeting together. And I think this is also what we all agreed on, what identifies us and what we want to achieve when we work with victims hand in hand to try to make for meaningful justice. So on that note, and again, you know, on the note of a celebration, we thought it would be important for this event, for the panel that we have, and we have an excellent panel, to talk about what gives us strength, what can be a motor that drives us in that fight for justice that is so difficult. And so what we found in the past years is that art and culture can really be that driver for change. Because art has the power that we imagine alternatives, right, to the status quo. It has also the power to provoke and to make us think. It has culture, for example, has the power to give us identity and strength in identity. And especially in contexts where genocide has occurred, you know, to hold on to culture and to make that a driving part of your fight for justice, I think is something really powerful. And I think especially also, you know, art can really have this role of joining us, of bringing in solidarity. And I think for us here, and this is really an invitation to all of you, you know, that we should join in solidarity for that fight for humanity, for compassion, and to really make for more just societies in the world. So we have a very nice panel that will speak about it. We have our board member, Brendan Hamber, who will introduce the panel and will speak a little bit more about that. Brendan is from South Africa, but he's been living in Northern Ireland already for 20 years. He is at the University of Ulster. He's a transitional justice expert, and he has a deep expertise on mental health and psychosocial approaches. So I think he will do a great job in facilitating this discussion. But before we move to the panel, I just wanted to highlight that we have a very special guest from Sri Lanka here in the audience as well. So she's there. It's Minal Naomi. She is currently a resident at the Artist Safe Haven initiative from Peace for Justice. So she's out of her country. I think she's an amazing artist. She does interdisciplinary art that combines drawings, paintings, murals, textiles, but she also does poetry. So she will make a live piece of art there on the stage, because we cannot speak about art without also living art and having art. And so we've asked her to work on the term justice and see what it means, and also see, you know, if there's contesting views on that. So she'll make a poem for us, and at the end of the event, we'll get back to her and see, and she can read the poem to us. So I wish you a very good panel. I hope it will be inspirational. And I now give the floor to Brendan.
Thanks very much, Marlies, for that kind introduction and for your words about Impunity Watch. I'm going to come back to Impunity Watch a little bit later, but we're going to jump into the panel for now. But toward the end, I would like to just say something about Impunity Watch. I've been on the board now, I think, for sort of 10 years. So I guess I can have a party for being 10 years as well, and 15 years. And it's been a fantastic time. And it's really hard to use words like fantastic when you're dealing with the type of subject matter that we're talking about. But it's fantastic in the sense that I take inspiration every single time I meet people from the staff, from the organization, Marlies, and those words that you used a few times and also in the video, sort of dignity, principles, and it makes you feel as a much more fulfilled person, and it's because of the staff and this organization. And so before we start the panel, I wanted to thank the organization for that, for its influence on my life and for its influence on everybody else's lives, which is significantly more important in terms of the victims and survivors. But I'm going to come back at the end to say a little bit more about that. But for now, what I want to do is just jump us straight into the panel. We had a long debate about what would be an appropriate topic, and we felt that art and its role in justice, art and its role in the fight against impunity offered us a different way of perhaps thinking about some of the challenges that many of the staff in the organization and the victims and survivors they work with face every day. So what I'm going to do is each of the panel members is going to have about 7 minutes, which are not very long, but to just tell us a little bit about some of their work. They'll come up one at a time, and then after that, we'll open it up to the floor before making some closing remarks. So the first speaker I would like to invite up is David Taylor, who is the country director for Impunity Watch in Burundi. David has extensive background in human rights, in transitional justice. He's published numerous reports and articles, some brilliant work around victim participation and a range of other issues. And David currently oversees Impunity Watch's work in the Great Lakes region, particularly Burundi, but also the DRC office. So Dave, we look forward to your input.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brandon, for the very nice, flattering introduction. I'll be happy when we can get this photo off the screen because it's quite embarrassing. Thank you. Yeah, as Brandon said, and as Marlies mentioned as well, I'm the country director for Impunity Watch in Burundi. I've been there for a fairly long time. Impunity Watch has been working in Burundi since 2010. We've been essentially working on processes of transitional justice, excuse me, and supporting communities to deal with the past in Burundi. As you can see from the photo, Burundi is essentially a paradise. I mean, it's a beautiful country with beautiful rolling hills, an amazing lake. Unfortunately, that paradise hides some quite difficult truths about Burundi. It's a country that has seen some horrific violence. A lot of people know about Rwanda, of course. We've heard a lot about the genocide that took place in Rwanda, but what very few people know is that actually Burundi has experienced genocides many years before Rwanda, of a similar nature, similar horrific scale of violence that we don't really hear about too much, which is incredible considering the scale of violence and the lasting impact that it's had on the country. So I'm going to try and explain just a little bit about the context, why Impunity Watch works there, and what is the role of art within our different interventions. So as I said, genocide, large-scale violence, and basically what this has led to now today is that we have essentially a one-party state that is imposing a certain narrative of the past. And at the same time, because there's been no process of transitional justice and dealing with the past, we have a population that is living side by side in what we characterize as essentially peaceful cohabitation rather than reconciliation, rather than going through a process. It's a somewhat pragmatic existence whereby people are essentially forced to live side by side, even though they know that perhaps their neighbor may have committed violence against their family. It's a choice that people have had to make. It's a very pragmatic population. But as I said, there's been very little alternative because there's been no process of transitional justice. So as you see on the slide here, what this has led to is that there's basically very little space for any type of dialogue, any type of discussion, which also leads to a lot of myth making about the past. And what we see is that those myths about the past become part of people's identity. And so these are the key elements that we try to work on in Burundi, which is incredibly challenging because in a context like Burundi that has been divided by political, but especially ethnic violence, you see that myth-making along ethnic lines. So what it means to be Tutsi, what it means to be Hutu, is defined by those myths of the past. So you see on the photos here, for example, that the photo on the left is quite a famous, in many respects, photo of a genocide, the genocide that took place in 1972, whereas the other photos that you see are photographs that of periods of history that receive very little attention. So even the photo on the bottom right should be something that is incredibly important to Burundian history, because it's an example of, in a very patriarchal culture that we have in Burundi, of a former queen who reigned in Burundi for a long period of time. Yet this is not spoken about because the dominant narrative is the photo on the left. So what this leads to is essentially that we have a history that gets boiled down to certain meta-narratives that get therefore imposed on the population, and in particular young people. If we can move to the next slide, you'll see that what this means then is that as you see more modern photographs, you see that the photograph on the left is the Truth Commission that we have in Burundi, that is in many respects repeating and imposing the exact same narrative that is imposed by the central government. Which means that young people are left essentially with these myths about the past. They are affected by a past that they've never physically experienced themselves because they weren't alive at the time, but they have these inherited traumas and inherited memories from their parents. What it means is that young people essentially today, unfortunately, they lack the ability to deconstruct those narratives, to deconstruct those myths. They lack agency. As I said, it's a very patriarchal, but also a very it's a culture whereby respect for authority is highly revered. So young people lack agency. They are marginalized from political decision-making. They are marginalized from politics, except when it comes to times of political upheaval. And then what you see at those times of political upheaval, so election periods, for example, is that those myths that are constructed into their identity then get manipulated by political actors. Of course, the result is then violence. With that very, very short history that you all now understand completely what is Burundi and what is the context. What we try to do in this context, therefore, as Impunity Watch, is, of course, we're focusing on dealing with the past and transitional justice. And one of the vehicles that we use for that is theatre, but also photography. And to simplify a little bit, what we try to do through these different cultural and artistic initiatives is exactly what you see on the screen. It's to demystify the past. It's to engage young people in a process of discovery. It's to try to take young people through a process where they can discover their history, understand what it means to have those collective myths for their own identity. It's providing a space for them to express and to discover alternative narratives about the past, particularly in that context where you have those, as I said, meta-narratives that are imposed by political actors. And it's providing space for dialogue. That space for dialogue is particularly important so that young people can feel that connection with the past, and so that we as Impunity Watch can support people to go through a process whereby the things that are happening today, the impunity that we see in our everyday lives, in Burundian everyday lives, is connected to what happened in the past. As Marlies said, it's about trying to make those connections so we understand where that structural injustice and structural impunity comes from. So the slide that you see here is one of the examples of participatory theatre that we have used. It's a photograph from a particular project whereby we worked with young people. We brought them together from different ethnic and political backgrounds, and they themselves were the ones that created a theatre piece. And so you see that even through going through that process, for themselves, it was a process of discovery for the small group that we worked with, but it was also for them a sort of mini process of transitional justice. We had young people testifying to us that they discovered things about people from other ethnic groups that they had never understood before. And then what you see is that you get this very organic process that develops, which led to an extremely rich theatre piece that is constructed by these young people, and that then they go and perform in different parts of the country. The benefit of that performance is that it's somehow seen as a softer process of transitional justice. It's not seen as something that is particularly controversial, but it provides a space for communities to then discover through this artistic initiative what happened in the past based on the different narratives of young people. And so the power of that performance is that young people and communities are therefore engaged in a process. They get to discover in an indirect way what happened in the past, but they also get to start to question some of those imposed narratives that I mentioned at the beginning. And what we've seen is that very often in Burundi, it's that perceptions of the past are often a matter of attitude, right? How people interpret the past. It's not necessarily about knowledge, because that knowledge exists. That knowledge exists within communities and within families. It's just the perception of how how they're interpreted, how they're manipulated, and how they're imposed on young people that becomes the key to understanding the past and key to understanding how violence can be perpetrated. So as I said, through the theatre, we've managed to, through the different performances around the country, create space for young people and communities to discuss, to discover, and to demystify the past. Moving to the final slide. 7 minutes is really not long enough for a presentation. The final slide is also part of the same process that I mentioned. There's certain periods of Burundian history, as I said, that simply don't get spoken about. There's certain memories of the past, there's certain narratives that exist within the minds of particularly the older generations in Burundi. Our fear is that if we don't start documenting those stories, if we don't start preserving those memories of the past, then they will be lost forever, and young people will never have the opportunity to discover and to demystify those parts of the past that are incredibly important. So the project that you see is that we used photography as a way of having a visual expression of not only the individuals that you see, it was mostly people above the age of 80, but also we tried to write down their stories, and not just the stories of the particular periods of violence that are always spoken about, so as I mentioned, 1972 and 1993, but also the other periods, so colonization, what happened just after independence. All of these stories are crucial for young people in Burundi to understand what happened in the past, understand who they are as Burundians, and as part of that process to, as I said, demystify, to talk about impunity, and to connect the past to the present. The final important and crucial aspect of all of these projects is that intergenerational dialogue. And that's a key strategy that we have as Impunity Watch, to make sure that we bring young people together with the older generations in order to have that dialogue, so people can discover the past, so people can connect to the past and the present through a very sort of organic process of discovery. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave, and for setting such a brilliant example of actually sticking to 7 minutes, which I know is incredibly difficult. I'm very struck by what you said in terms of it's seen as a softer entry to talk about these issues, and I think that's been my experience working with different art projects as well. But actually, when you get into it, it's the much harder issues in some ways. Sometimes it's easier to draw lines of right and wrong, and this is good and this is bad, and when you get into those type of projects, you're in those really gray zones, and it becomes a lot more difficult. But thank you, a fantastic presentation and a lot of clarity, so thank you, Dave. Our next speaker is Tatiana Milovanovic. She's the program director at the Post-Conflict Research Center, a women-led peace-building organization that's dedicated to fostering a culture of peace in the Western Balkans. She has extensive experience over the last 14, 15 years working in program development and various NGOs and with civil society organizations. She's an expert practitioner, which we're going to hear more about, and she's also the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Balkan Discourse. So Tatiana, you're very welcome, and we look forward to it.
Thank you. I didn't stop for an applause, just to be. But Tatiana is also a former student of yours, so that's super privileged to be here. Brandon was also my mentor for a thesis I wrote, so this is just like extra layers of feeling excited. But yeah, thank you all very, very much for being here, and a big thank you to Impunity Watch for inviting us. We're very happy to be a local partner for the organization. So I come from Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's on this continent, at least. I'll tell you, but I was asked to, the same as David, give you a little bit of a context as to why so many years after the 90s, we're still talking about Bosnia in terms of this post-conflict context. So back in the 90s, during the breakup of Yugoslavia, or the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, it broke to 6 countries now. So Bosnia is one of them. We have also today's Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, North Macedonia, and Montenegro. Unfortunately, the breakup was very horrible. It was with many wars, conflict, and genocide. Thankfully, today's Bosnia still stands as a country. However, it stands like that after over 100,000 people were killed and some 2.2 million were forcibly displaced. All this happened, in short, due to some very, very strong nationalist agendas that were in play in former Yugoslavia, especially after the death of Josip Broz Tito, and some of these great power programs that were in place in trying to create new states after the breakup of Yugoslavia. Where that leaves us today is in the same way that the war and genocide was led in the country. It was led through three main ethnic groups. So you have Bosniaks, primarily Muslims, Serbs, primarily Orthodox religion, and Croats, primarily Catholics. In the same way that the war was led back in the 90s, today the country is very divided across these ethnic lines and groups. We are a country of less than 4 million people, but we have 2 entities, 10 cantons, and over 150 different ministries, which is incredibly, yes, right? Almost everything in the country is also divided by 3, so by these 3 ethnic groups. Now, what's civil society to do? So as Brendan said, I represent a Post-Conflict Research Center. We're a non-governmental organization and research center. We're based in Sarajevo, but we do a lot of our work also regionally, so working with these Western Balkans or ex-Yugoslav countries. Back when we started in 2010, we were 4 people who took advantage of free internet, and at that time Skype, because we didn't have Zoom. It wasn't a thing. For most of you do know that today where we're sitting is also, well, it used to be a place that hosted the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia. Today that is the residual mechanism for criminal tribunals, but for Bosnia and Bosnians is the really main database and historical record of the suffering that our people endured. Unfortunately, we still don't have unified history teaching in our country, so ICTY is really where we go for most of our facts and figures about the war. Now, when we went through it, when we started this work, we read and heard stories from witnesses about horrible, horrible suffering. But we also read and heard about stories of rescue and incredible stories of moral courage. And so we found people, some of their faces are here, that in the worst moments of humanity and in war and in genocide, helped their neighbors, saved someone. In all of these cases, it was not someone that they knew, and it was people from different ethnic groups. So in the worst of times, they were ready to cross those boundaries and help each other. And so we utilize a lot of documentary filmmaking and photography to record their stories, to record the stories of people who were saved and people who were saving, and really use art here to promote just very basic human empathy and this need to help each other in war, but especially in peace. Now, in the next images, as I said at the beginning, unfortunately, still a very divided society, but we're divided into these main 3 ethnic groups, right? However, the country has over 15 minority groups live in. they are very, very not represented in our society. They're also not represented in our constitution, because the main focus is on the threes. And so what we did is we went into the communities of our biggest minority group, and that's Roma, and we wanted to see how they live and how they handle all the stereotypes and all the discrimination that they deal with. And we used actually Council of Europe's manual that they have that basically outlines stereotypes against Roma communities that all of us carry, not Bosnians, all of us as a global society. And we took that manual. It's horrible when you read through it, because we all do kind of get brought up with these thinkings that Roma are dirty, or they're stealers, or they rob you, they're poor, and et cetera, et cetera. And we went into Bosnian Roma communities and found examples of people who are nothing like that and who are the exact opposite of all the stereotypes listed in the book. And we utilized a lot of photography and visual arts really to give the voice to these people that otherwise don't have a voice in our society, basically at all. And finally, as I mentioned in the beginning, our country went through war on all these different sides, but it also went through genocide. To be more specific, the Bosniak Muslim population went through genocide, and some 8,732 men and boys were killed just because they were Muslim, and over 15,000 people of Muslim religion were forcibly displaced from their homes, were starved, were held in capture, and mostly women were raped. And so out of all this misery came out an incredible group of women who are the mothers of Srebrenica, who have led just almost all the big changes in our society, if I may dare to say so, when it comes to transitional justice. They went to the ICTY, they testified, they made sure that the perpetrators are known by their name and their face, they made sure that the actual war crimes are proven and the genocide is being proven and being talked about. They were the main driving force behind ICMP, the International Commission for Missing Persons, as well as the driving force between today's Srebrenica Memorial Center. However, as we go further, as we move further away from 30 years since the Bosnian War and genocide, they're not very much represented in our society. Due to a lot of nationalism as well, a lot of their work is being denied and is being repressed. They're being even physically threatened and so on. And so what we are trying to do is trying to scale up their reach on a more regional and international level. We have the skills that these rural women don't and they shouldn't have after all this fight. And so what we did and what we're trying to do with them is, by utilizing art and sort of symbolism, we created a whole set of activities under this big umbrella project called Srebrenica Heroines. And the idea of the project is to document their stories, first their personal stories, but also talk about the importance of women's movements in our society and just how big of importance was their work for the Bosnian society that we know today. And this art exhibition behind, there was a big art exhibition. We collected over like 5,000 scarves. So for Bosnian women, scarves and headscarves and dresses are sort of a symbol of commitment, but also a symbol of freedom of choice. And so we mobilized over 5,000 women from all around the world and all 5 continents to donate their own personal scarves, which then we gathered young people from all around the Balkans who came to Srebrenica and with us put this exhibition together with the mothers, and talked about all these issues. Now to end, because I also try not to take too much time, I'm going to read a short little poem that was actually written by a mother of Srebrenica for this specific project. The Heroines, we translated into English. The poem is called Mother. Among the graves, like an ancient tombstone, shoulders frail, burdened by years, there stands a mother, a sister, a wife, a daughter. There stands a heroine. On her head, a white scarf, embroidered with the black thread of sorrow. Down her cheeks, heavy years flow, and tears flow, not to be seen. Every tear is a story in itself. An empty soul, desires abandoned, she would give anything to be buried with them. Today, they're absolved by God and they're guilty of nothing. Dear God, grant her peace, that she may live with peace from now on. Looking at her hardened face, I see images of the war, perhaps because I'm a part of the sorrow, for I now have neither father nor brother. This was written by Nermina Lakota, a Srebrenica mother, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Tatiana, it's quite hard to follow that, but it's really good to see you again. And one of the reasons I love teaching is it shouldn't really be called teaching, it should be called learning, right? So you're teaching any of us in the community, in academia, all over the place, so thank you for that. And what really struck me when I was looking at the images, and it goes back to what I said in the start, there's such a lot of dignity in those photographs. And I think what political violence does is it robs people of their humanity and their dignity. And so that really struck me, and the words of the poem. So thank you. Our next speaker, Khaled Barakan, I met in a less glamorous place than a classroom. I met him in a Lebanese restaurant in Belfast, purely accidentally. Because there was a friend of mine who was a curator of a gallery, and then she was there and she said, you've got to meet this guy, he does this incredible art. And then when we were preparing for this, his face appeared on the Zoom, because we were all in different countries, and I thought, I think I know this guy. And it was Khaled. So you're very welcome. Khaled's a Syrian-born artist, a cultural activist. He's a founder of an organization called Co-Culture, a Berlin-based organization that aims to empower underrepresented artists from the global south. And he uses training, education in art practices to challenge structural injustices and voices of those who are marginalized. He's exhibited in a whole range of different places, museums, biennales. I know in Belfast he's been engaged in some projects there as well. So we really look forward to hearing more about your work.
Oh, yes, now it's on. Yes, I just said happy anniversary. I hope with time we will not need impunity or to be watched, because we will move to a more justice place, which I don't think so we will, but I hope so one day. So to contextualize Syria in 7 minutes and then showing you some work, it will be an impossible task, but just very, very, very briefly about Syria. We've been ruled by Assad family since 55 years. Since then, we don't have, there's no impunity and there's no justice. There's all kind of brutality that was happening inside the country in silence. In 2011, when funny enough, also, I don't know if some people know, everything started with a graffiti piece by young boys who painted on their, or sprayed on in their school walls, fall down the regime, and then they were arrested, and then after they were arrested, their family tried to release them, and the regime rejected. And this is how the revolution started, and I think a lot of us still insist to call it revolution today, and I see all the time the reaction from people when I say revolution, because everyone think about it, how the media represent it all the time, that it's a war, and I think it turns into a proxy war and civil war, etc., etc. What really to talk about? Assad is the most brutal, I think, one of the most brutal leaders or dictators we've seen. They've in Syria all kind of weapons were used, including chemical weapons. People were arrested, half of the country or 1/3 of the country is displaced, 1/3 of the country is outside. Only when we went outside, we managed to, for the first time, form our voices and collect our voices and ask for justice. I never actually thought of this concept before in my life. While I was in Syria, I don't think there was, I thought, of course, they have impunity, and of course, we don't have justice. Only when we went outside, this concept appeared to me. So I just, in 2011, I was already in Frankfurt. I was in Syria, then I left to Frankfurt for several reasons. And I started talking to people about what's happening in Syria. And it was almost impossible because how people, they don't want to look at the horrible. And it's sometimes hard when things also presented in different contexts. So if you are sitting somewhere, I don't know, here, for example, in front of your screen in a safe place and you see these images, how do you perceive it? It's a little bit different when you actually on the ground. So I tried to, through art, to use creativity to allow these images to be shown and to be seen. So what I did, I collected 5 images from different places. The series called the Entitled Images. So I took out the victims out by peeling the skin of the photo, the same when you have like dead skin. It was very like a precise exercise and very hard as well, or it gives hard feeling. And in this case, turning the victims into, while applying layer of violence, turning the victims into, the specific victims into concept of victimhood in general, those which they represent more than who they are. And sorry, I have to keep my eyes on time because I have some good slides to run through. Okay, 5 minutes, good. So yeah, if we can go to the next slide. So and now go back, please. And in this slide also, as a way of, I wouldn't say forcing people to show respect to the victims, I decided to hang the photos on 80 centimeters above the ground. So the only way to perceive it is actually to pull to it. So, and I wanted them to respect what they're seeing, basically. And in this case also, I think what maybe the action does that allow people to look at the photo and to look to those who are still alive, because sometimes the loss is not for the people who died, the loss is for the people who stayed alive. And it gives this second layer of going beyond the immediate reaction, because it's very normal that when we see hard photos, we just look away, like this is how our mechanism works. And of course, saving the dignity of people, and that was the most difficult part, and still question until today. And I think we were talking about it the other day also, in terms of how can we make advocacy while we have this victim-centric approach? How can we present their pain, but without presenting them in a painful situation? Because this is not how we should do it again, because that's another layer of violence that we apply if the media is showing the photos in this way. Do you know Caesar photos? Yeah? Who doesn't? By raising hand. Okay. Yeah, it's incredible because, I mean, I don't really know what to say. Every time I ask this question, I presented this work in many, many places, and when I ask this question and people also don't know what Caesar photos is, I just get shocked, because if that photos just happened elsewhere, if it's Ukraine, if it's here, it's any place, it will literally change. Maybe I wouldn't say the word, but it will change the situation in Syria. It's incredibly graphical photos from the prison of Assad, documented by a photographer, a soldier who was working for Assad. He took 55,000 photos of 11,000 tortured dead bodies. So the regime systematically documented the death of these people, and the way how they systematically archived them, they put tape on their forehead or in their chest, and they write a number just to turn it into a case to archive them. And I don't know why they did that, and which actually was incredible for the victims today, because these photos are one of the most important evidence against Assad. And then showing these photos, it's very horrible. It's very graphical images. It's photos. I compare these photos to the Holocaust photos. I feel very invited to look at them, Google them, and I'm really sorry for what you will find. They are very horrible photos, very painful to look at. So, and then there was this question, how can we show again the photos while protecting victim identities and dignities? If my brother is one of the, or my father or my daughter or my husband or whatever is presented in one of these photos, I don't want them to be remembered as this is the last photos. I want the world to remember them. I want them to be remembered with their full dignity. So anyway, so what I did, I turned the photos. In each photo, I don't know, you know, if any photograph, it has something called metadata. Metadata is the, yeah, I think many people nodding, so I don't need to explain it. So the metadata is basically the information that contained in the photos, also photographic information. But in a court, this is the legal information that you can use, not only what's in the photo, but also the metadata. So what I did to allow these photos to be seen, I took the name of the file. By the way, it's imaginary work of the or proposal of the photos, not the photos themselves, because the photos are protected and there's different stories around it, so about the ownership. So what I did, I used this name of the, or to use traces. Or first of all, I put tape, the same as the regime did, and then I traced the name of the file with handwriting. It's kind of investigative action. And I wanted to be a photographic as well information, so that's why our photographic presentation. That's why it contains all the other information. If we can go to the next slide, yeah, and then I framed them as you can see here. And then if we go to the next slide, you will see there's, I think, 124 frames. What I managed to do, and also what I want, why I wanted to do that in that amount. I want to also point out to the murder as well that has happened. If I would have chance to do 55,000 photos, I would do it one day. So with this work, it's another proposal that we will do in cooperation with Impunity Watch. So basically these photos are two of these photos, right? So of the Caesar photos. One thing, I was talking a lot with different people from different political bodies and working with different lawyers, and they kind of insisted that sometimes these photos has to be shown, especially in political environments and United Nations, different places. And I agree with that, but I think that we should still keep the dignity of people in a space or in the center. So what I thought to do is to print the photos 2 by 1 centimeter. It's not what you see here, this is Photoshop photo. It's just to present the idea. To print them 2 by 1 centimeter, and so you enter the room and you see nothing, because this represents also how people don't know about the photos. So you don't see anything, and then there's a magnifying glass. So you will, every person attending to the exhibition, they will go and they will look for the photos themselves. In this case, they will become the investigative kind of action, but also it will give them the level of emotion that they want to get out of the photos. So when they feel enough, they can stop. And also this kind of playful mood, I think it will allow the photos to be seen. Because the first thing when showing these photos in many places, just everyone look away. They don't want to see it. If we go to the next slide, this is another project I did. It's called Mute. It's a public art installation in a form of demonstration in front of the High Court of Koblenz. There was a trial. Do you know Koblenz trial? Anyone doesn't? Okay, very few. Okay, so a Koblenz trial, 2 Syrian men arrived to Germany very, very quick. Arrived to Germany, they apply for asylum as everyone else. People in the same camp, they met them or they saw them and they freaked out because they were the same people who tortured them and who sexually abused them and who killed their relative or people also in the prison. There was, I think, 4,500 cases investigated against one of them, who was used to be the president of Fir al-Khatib, which is a very ugly intelligence department, and the other person who used to collect people from the street. If you go back, please, just for 1 second. Yeah, so in front of the High Court of Koblenz, where they took them to be, what's the word? Investigated. They were also parallel to that. There was COVID and there was a lockdown, so no one was allowed to go and to meet and together in one place. So, and I felt this is not fair. It's our trial as Syrians. It's not fair for the families, not fair for the victims, not to be able to be there. So what I did, I sent an open call to different Syrian artists and activists to donate their clothes, and using their clothes, I formed their body. And when I say I, it's we. There was different people working on that. So there was, and then we formed their body using their clothes, and we installed the work in front of the court. If you go next to the next slide, in front of the High Court of Koblenz while the trial was happening, in a way trying to impact as well what's happening inside the courtroom. And if you go next, I've been asked to stop, so I will just go very quickly. If you can go back, please. No, yeah, just for this picture for 1 second. So we installed the work in 2 days. The second day, there was also the victims and their families, and they joined the demonstration with bringing the photos of their beloved one, who were, some of them were arrested also from demonstration. So kind of bringing that momentum back. If you go, and then because it's a demonstration, so we kept demonstrating from one place to another without losing the legacy of the main reason when the installation was created in front of Koblenz. So every time we move to a new place, it carry out all the messages that has happened in the past. Is this the last slide? Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
I'm feeling like I'm acting with a sense of impunity in forcing everybody to stop just as you were getting going. But thanks for presenting that in fabulous, fabulous work. And it shows what one person can do, I think, in many ways. And so thank you. Well, but thank you. And I think the other thing, maybe we pick it up in the questions, but when you were showing the magnifying glass and the pictures lower down, it made me more conscious of thinking about us as observers, you know, and where do we as human rights activists sit in looking at and peering in at other people, even if sometimes for the best intention. So it made me think of that. I don't know if that's what you were getting at, but we maybe pick that up in the question. But thanks, Khaled. It's amazing. Okay, so to our last. I have a problem with the glasses, so I don't need them to read, but I need them to see you clearly. So our last speaker is Brizna Kasach. She is the Gender Program Director for Impunity Watch in Guatemala. She's a very well-known human rights activist. She's president of the board of directors of the National Union of Guatemalan Women. She has been fighting impunity, involved in different court cases, working along survivors, and as part of the feminist movement in Guatemala for a long time. And I think the best way to describe you is as a force of nature. And so I look forward to hearing you speak.
Thank you. It's really hard to there's so much to say in 7 minutes. Like Marlise said, it all started in Guatemala. So I'll just start by saying that Guatemala went through a 36-year-old conflict from 1960 to 1996. And you will see in the first slide some of the aftermath of what happened during the conflict. The Truth Commission identified that more than 200,000 victims of gross human rights violations. It included genocide, sexual violence, torture, enforced displacement, and 45,000 enforced disappearance. And you see here some of the victims of enforced disappearance that were found in exhumations. More than 8,000 victims have been found, but only just over 3,000 have been identified. So there's a huge gap in terms of how many victims still need to be found. In 1996, the peace agreements were signed And there was a boom in terms of the international help. A lot of the founders, including Marlise, worked in the Truth Commission, and some of the members, my colleagues, worked also in the Truth Commission. So there was a lot of expectation in terms of what could be done after the peace agreements and some of the recommendations of the Truth Commissions, and a lot of desire from the victims, primarily to find their family members who have been disappeared and to find justice. So I wanted to show these pictures just reflecting this need to find the disappeared family members, and also this, for example, this picture over here of family members in marches carrying crosses with the names of the family members. So as Impunity Watch, we have promoted a lot of strategies, and we have learned alongside with the victims that we work with different strategies. So it's a little hard not to speak of other strategies that we've implemented. We've obviously done a lot of work in terms of organization, strengthening strategic litigation, and also strengthening alliances. But I will focus on the art and culture aspect that that we're here to talk about today. So one of the things that we've reflected on is, from a victim-centered approach, we have learned that the importance of the strategies being pertinent to the culture or close to the practices, the cultural practices. One of the things that I forgot to mention was that the Truth Commission also found that 83% of the victims were Mayan people, and that 86% of the perpetrators was the military forces. And I think that's important to say, because those military forces continue to have power in Guatemala today and still present us with challenges today. So here we see, for example, a Mayan ceremony being held in front of the Justice Palace. And this is, it's an important aspect in the aftermath of genocide, because these practices have been stereotyped as being witchcraft, as being negative practices. So it is a reivindicative practice to take over public space and to position the cultural practices as being important. But it also links, it is important for them, like the links that they have with their family members that have been disappeared. It is also an important practice in terms of what it means to search for justice. And there, I'm not an expert in this, but there's a whole energetic and spiritual connection in terms of like the Mayan calendar and what days are important and what they do in terms of interpreting the fire, so that the justice process will help them, and so that they ask their ancestors as well to help them in the search for justice. So to do this in front of the court is very important. So it's also a power thing to face racism. So I will go on to talk about more about the art aspect that we've also promoted. And this is a mural from Santa Lucia, Cotumalhuapa, which is a region where more than 100 union workers were disappeared in the 80s, but after a huge strike for sugar, against sugar mills. An association created books to tell the story of what happened in Santa Lucia, and they wanted to translate what was in the books, the testimonies and the stories, into images and into a mural. So if they created this mural, and if we go into the next slide, we will see how this process was also used to work with youths so that they can also discuss what was in the books, but also how they could use that to tell the story with other groups. And you will see, for example, in the back, the mural in their office, so that when people come, they can tell the story and they can educate other people of what happened in their story. So you have the book, but then you also have the mural. The challenge here is that this mural is in their office, so it's like when people come to this space. Other groups, for example, in Ishkan, have also found music and rap, for example, as a way to express and tell the story of what happened. And I just want to show a little tease of what that can be in Ishkan. So we can go to the next slide.
Poeta MC, sí, desde el Ishkan, la tierra de la resistencia. Yao.
So it's just like a little tease because I know we don't have that much time to elaborate, but this is also a creative way of how young people can relate to a type of music and how they can hear story of what happened in the Guatemalan conflict. And I also want to talk about how art can be a way to think about reparational measures. And this mural here is a mural that was a reparational measure established by a criminal court in Guatemala in the Achi women's case that reached a guilty verdict in January of 2021. This case was a trial against 5 self-defense patrollers that had raped Achi women in a military detachment. And one of the reparation measures, which was more symbolic measures, was to create this mural in a public place in the town center. So here you see the women, and I want to show the next slide so you can actually appreciate the mural. The objective of the mural was to dignify the women and to show the leadership of their fight for justice. So this was done by an actual artist to represent that. And I wanted to also, so you can see how it changes how it goes from women being sort of in the ground and covered to having the centered women in, with the words that say hope. So it's like a significant change in how women can be viewed in that. And I want to say that we could think of it as just being an art piece, but it's actually also a power fight in terms of taking public spaces. And I want to say that in the university, the National University in Guatemala has more than 100 murals, and they were just recently erased. Some of them were erased by a newly fraudulent elected rector. And this is a constant fight in Guatemala. We see these types of artists or artistic ways of trying to recuperate memory, and there is a constant denial from the state, a narrative of denial of what happened in Guatemala. And I also, that's why I wanted to highlight how the military groups and economic elite continue to be in power. The last 3 governments have been of military tendency, and they continue to deny this, what happened. And today we are in a crisis that continues to deny this. So I also want to say that it's important that we continue to have this international support, because even though it has been 25 years since the signing of the peace, it continues to be important to have that support. So I've had the sign to stop, so I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Brisna. And two things really stick out for me, because you started with talking about Guatemala and when there was an interest in it, and it just really reminds us how much and how fickle the international community can be at different times, and we take interest in one place and then we forget and then we move on, and so Guatemala has just been so consistent in Impunity Watch's work, and again the theme of dignity was there, and how can we ignore the issues you raised about erasing, because that's so much of the work, the attempt to try and make people forget. Whether it's very physically removing a mural or a court case or impunity, it's all about trying to make the world forget. So thanks for reminding us of that. So what we're going to do now is invite our speakers up onto the stage and get a little bit of time. I'll ask them one or two questions, but I also want, like you, to maybe engage with them, thoughts that you might have, questions that you might have. So if you can come up to the stage. Do I need to move this along? Okay, I've been told to hold the mic closer to my mouth, so I'm going to do that. After being the time police, I think I need to obey as well and set a good example. So, look, thanks everybody. A fantastic panel, and 7 minutes was ridiculous, so we apologize. But you did a fantastic job in introducing incredible topics. And so the first question really I wanted to ask each of you, or maybe one or two of you can reflect, then we'll ask another one, then we move to the audience. But what drives you to do this type of work? What is the why behind what's going on for the work that you're doing, but also obviously the communities that you're working with? Don't need to pass this on. Anyone? When it gets to you, like music for chairs.
Oh, no, we're not allowed to. Okay, sorry. Well, maybe two things. One, on a personal level, it's my family history. So I come from a family of perpetrators. So my father was a fighter in the war. He fought for the, if some of you do know the Bosnian history, then for Arkan Tigers, which was a paramilitary unit from Serbia. So I learned about this quite early, relatively early in my my life, around when I was around 13 years. Terrible time in your life to learn about these things. Really confuses you as a teenager. But that sort of motivated me to look into this history, and then to stay, and realistically, personally, to change the legacy of my family name into something that's more positive and more peaceful. Maybe on a professional level, it's really all the stories of these incredible people that we do document through our work, and the fact that I wish, and through PCRC as well, to keep their stories alive, and to also try to educate more of our young people about our history, as really as simple as a way to not repeat it. The Western Balkans has a tendency historically to repeat its crimes, and we're hoping that through documentation and through also pushing this into school curricula is one way to prevent it from happening again.
Yeah, I think I have like also similar personal and professional. Personal, I would just, I think like most of the Syrians, if not everyone, we were target of social injustice, I think all my life, or in so many occasions. And I've been trained as an artist in my military service. So before I went to the art school, I went to the military service because it's mandatory. And they assigned me they discovered that I can paint and draw, and they assigned me the task to paint the president. And I painted him so many times that I became good, I think. Yeah, and but also it's a weird situation because you work for the propaganda, right? Like you become as a tool of the propaganda. I mean, it was inside the military base, and then you learn kind of the importance of the art as a tool, because instead of telling the story of the oppressor, you can tell the story of the oppressed. And then meeting people, talking to them, there's something called in psychology called introjectory, which is basically when you meet someone, you kind of when you hear the stories or the pain of others, it gets into you. Like I have it as I think artists maybe they have a little bit of sensitive souls, so I can't ignore when I hear it. It becomes almost my story. That's why it was very hard in general to work with the situation and the whole horrible photos or whatever situation in Syria. So that also seeing people, and I can't compare my pain or what I went through to any of the victims. I can't even imagine the amount of pain that they went through, and then it affects me, and then I can't imagine how much it affects them, and that's what gives me the strength, I think, to do and to continue.
No, yeah. I also have a personal commitment. My family also has, I think, like many Guatemalan families, victims of the conflict as well. My father was a union teacher leader, and he was actually killed during the armed conflict. And I have an uncle who was also unforcibly disappeared, who worked with peasants. And that sort of forced our family to have to seek political refuge in Canada. So I think that can have different effects. And I think my mom's also continued commitment in exile influenced us to continue being involved with Guatemalan and solidarity work from being in Canada. And then I decided to go back to Guatemala, I think just wanting to understand more. And I decided professionally to continue studying in a career that I wanted to understand more. Not to get involved necessarily, just to understand, but I just continued to get involved and meeting more victims, and I think you just keep going. There comes a point where you just sort of can't look back and ignore, and you're committed to wanting to make the country not continue to be in conflict, and you want peace and democracy in your country.
I think it's quite obvious that I'm the only person who is actually not from the country where they're working. So it's difficult to follow the incredible stories. But I think for me, there are similar connections that have developed out of what began as a professional journey with Impunity Watch, just out of an interest, but then has developed into something that has now become quite out of nowhere. We're celebrating 15 years with Impunity Watch, but I'm coming up to 10 years in Burundi, and I have quite some deep personal connections with the country. And so, to see the impact of the type of work that we're doing, to see how it affects the communities that we're working in, you cannot help but be motivated by that. So, from the professional to the personal, and then something that becomes deeply ingrained within you in a personal capacity.
Thank you. I mean, I really enjoy panels like this because you just discover things that you didn't know, and that's just so powerful. So thanks. I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll come to everybody else. You can do that when you're the chair. You can sort of abuse it a bit. But the purpose of this panel was, what is the contribution of art to impunity? So I know you sort of said this in your presentations, but I'll wear I'll sound like a funder or something. But how do you know what you're doing is working? you know, how do you know if it's making a difference, if it's impacting on justice or impunity? Can I ask that question? It's a difficult one, but I would love to hear your reflections on it, maybe an example of an impact. But I prefer that question. How do you know it's working?
No, I think it's a super difficult question for an organization in general working on impunity. It's difficult. How do we measure impact? How do we measure a absence of impunity? But particularly when we're talking about something like art, how do we look at social impact? How can that be measured? It's almost impossible, right? Especially when we're talking about things that are not tangible. We're talking about things that are perhaps having an impact further down the line in terms of social processes. I think, though, that there's a certain responsibility for an organization like Impunity Watch to be ensuring that we are measuring impact, because if we are trying to provoke these types of processes, if we're saying that art can be a means through which we deal with the past, we provoke social change, then we have a certain obligation to understand what we're doing. So from an organizational perspective, you can see it very often on the faces of the people that we're working with in the communities. It's the testimonies that you get from communities, from young people who discover for the first time, as I said in the presentation, that there is an alternative narrative, that they have a similar history to somebody from a different ethnic group or a different political group that they never knew existed. So for us, it's about documenting, it's about understanding that impact that we're having from a very human perspective, qualitative stories, storytelling as part also of the process of performance.
Thank you. Thank you for the question as well. For us, it's been not to get into like actually project management, but as that it is my forte. Actual evaluation of projects, not through sign-in sheets, but we've been, as we are a research center, from very early on, we've started getting connections with actual universities. We're an NGO research center, so we don't belong to a university. And we found that to be really great, first because usually researchers from academia, no offense, come to contexts like us to extract, right? It's normal, it's part of research to do that. And then we realized, okay, if that's what you're doing, then what we're going to do is we're gonna find those academics that actually have experience in evaluating programs and utilize you to get something back. And so we've been a part of several research initiatives, and obviously when we go to get that wonderful food there after this conversation, I can also share more of the outputs we've created, but we've partnered with several universities, including the King's College in London, and then a couple of universities in Bosnia to work with academics who can evaluate our project. So we led them into our work for a couple of years, and they work with specific beneficiaries of specific beneficiary groups. For us, that's mostly young people, so we've had research that follows, for example, one youth group for 2-3 years to see the process of change as they go through our program. And to knock on wood, we've actually seen that change, and people much smarter than me have actually put it in like tables and words. But what we track is, it's very, very important, is this, not need, but change in perception of the others among the young people. So measuring that before they enter our programs, and then during, and how it changes, and after. And about, I guess, between 70 and 80% of young people, there has been a noticeable change in perception of themselves, who they are, stepping out of the ethnic group as well, which was very important for Bosnian context, but then also their willingness to reach out to the others and understand the different points of view. And maybe through the actual results, we were in the field, we were also really happy that some of these, and actually some of the the slides that you saw and some of that photography is part of a teaching manual too. So we've created a manual with local teachers on how to teach peace in schools. Very difficult to do. It took us 7 years. It's available online as well, and starting this year, it's actually part of school curricula in one part of the country. As I said, we're very divided, so it takes a lot of work to go piece by piece and canton by canton, but it has started rolling out this year, and it's the first time in Bosnian history that youth actually get a chance to talk about peace in formal settings. So they'll be made in a way to start thinking about these issues in school settings, and we're hoping that in long term will be able to create sort of a ripple effect in the society as well. So thank you.
If I may just add, I think we have this like similar measures, obviously, but I think in the art world it's a little bit different because obviously we have the advocacy as one thing and using artistic platforms. So first of all, I think the work is successful and impactful when the victims confirm it first, like for example with the mute. With every step, we're sending them photos and asking how they feel about it, and their reaction to the work after or while they join, and how they we interviewed them how they felt about it. I think that was the first success and the most important success, because you feel I'm claiming that I'm representing community, right? And then if you feel that moment, you achieve that and you feel like, yes, it's done. But that's first thing, because now we have to go to the advocacy, which is important, the media coverage, right? Because I think it's very, very important with our work is not the happening, because I think especially with socially engaged work and participatory work, we focus sometimes, or people tend to focus on the happening, especially when we work with victims groups and also other groups. I think what is more important is the aftermath, the circulation and social media and media, etc. So that's also a measure that you can see. For example, some work of mine, they were very, very exposed, some others not. So I know a little bit also that give a little bit of indicators.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. How do you know if something is working? I think also I've been with Impunity Watch for almost 10 years as well, and I think also seeing or perceiving the changes in terms of the relationships. For example, if we're talking about the cultural practices. And how we involve and how we include them in the activities, and how that also empowers the victims that we work with, in terms of speaking of the Mayan perspective in the different activities that we think about. And I think that we as an international organization are more aware of those sort of practices. And I do see how the victims organizations relate to us differently than other international organizations. So maybe sometimes it's just perception, and we need to sort of document that a little better. And the other thing, in terms of the art, I think just the fact that there's such a this narrative against what happened during the conflict, and this denial from the government, and the fact that they want to erase, for example, I was saying about murals, or they don't want to promote these sort of things. It just tells you that these sort of things are actually having an impact. And I think that's sort of like an indicator of that we're sort of in the right path of at least sharing stories and what happened.
Such a brilliant answer, really. You know that if everyone's trying to stop it, you know you're probably doing something right, or not everybody, but certain people are trying to stop it. So thanks. So that's fantastic. I did promise to open the floor, so I'm going to do that. And what I'll do is sort of line you up, and we'll see how far we get. We got 20 more minutes. So unfortunately for our friends online, we're not going to take questions online simultaneously. We're just going to go with those in the room. So I'm going to start here, yourself, over there. Now I have to remember this, over there. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. What I'm going to do, actually, let's take 2 at a time. because then maybe we'll get a little bit more in.
Thank you so much for all the speakers. I loved your message of hope and the focus on dignity. I remember when I was around 12 or 13, I was watching the news a lot, following the war in the former Yugoslavia, and I wrote my journal, justice is so necessary and we need to have hope for the victims, etc. So I love actually that it's like a circle for me that is now complete listening to your stories. I have a question of advice to you and maybe a very brief other question, but I'll start with the brief one, which is how do you cope yourselves with this very difficult work? I think some of you have hinted at it a little bit, but I'm just very interested with how you're confronted yourselves with images, maybe your own memories, but also with all those different stories from others. So how do you deal with that? Then my question of advice is, for almost a year, I've been in touch with this Colombian family here in the Netherlands. We're in this emergency refugee care, a noodopvang. I saw them a year ago full of hope and full of commitment to make the best out of it, learn the language, do things. And now, a year later, they're depressed, they're demoralized. They don't even want to leave the camp anymore. How can you help them restore their dignity, feel dignified, and deal with this in a situation where there is no hope, they're not in their own country, they're not with their community? So any advice on that, I would much appreciate. Thank you.
We're going to do, if you could try not do 2 or 3, just do 1, then we got 3.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for also just showcasing meaningful work, what you do from Impunity Watch, each individual and for each cases. I also wonder, has there been an opportunity to showcase these at the expedition in The Hague itself? And I wanted to add, so each cases, Syria has been the recent one, and in these 4, it's a way of highlighting the unhighlighted, and especially putting pressure on governments to act. And taking one note from the first speaker, it's not only looking at these countries through these specific lenses of conflict and minorities and all of these issues, which are, of course, important to highlight, but also just caution with that to look especially from the West to, let's say, other countries, reducing them to these situations. And I wanted to just add one more thing. Khalid, you apologized to us when you showed us the photoshopped photo. My opinion is that you shouldn't apologize. I think we should apologize for continually to look away. I think photos from the Holocaust, is imprinted in our minds. It should be the same way for all of these situations, for all of these happenings. So thank you.
I'm not going to go in any specific order or repeat all the questions in the interest of time, but any comments from yourselves on what you heard? Brisna?
I'll answer in terms of the how we cope. What was a discussion that we had today in our internal meeting and self-care. And yeah, I think there's different levels. I think at a personal level, therapy is important, and it is something that you have to deal with. But also at an organizational level, you need to think about how, when you work with victims and when you work with such difficult, traumatic aspects, but also in conflicting contexts, it is important to think about those issues. And one of the things I like to think about is that sometimes we feel guilty, maybe, if we think about taking care of ourselves. But if we don't, then there's nothing we can do. And a few years back, I went to a feminist retreat, and there's something that I loved. There was a phrase that was, what's the point of the revolution if we can't dance? So, like, if we're doing all this work, but then we can't enjoy whatever comes out of it, then what's the point? So, yes, definitely thinking of different mechanisms at a personal level, but also an organizational level is important. And I think at different levels we have taken different practices or taking measures, but it's definitely something that we need to continue to work on.
Coping question?
The coping question, I don't know how I'm not coping with it. It hit me. I had burnout. It was very, very bad, and I couldn't find psychotherapy in Germany. I have a refugee status. I don't speak German, blah, blah, blah. So I couldn't anyway. Just this is like the truth answer. But like, again, I can't compare my pain if I look at others people's pain and what drives them, and they're still going every day, every place, and holding the photos of their beloved one. I just ease myself, and it gives me purpose sometimes as well. It gives, like, I think maybe sometimes it's an escapism mechanism as well, but it gives me strength to continue. And yeah, thank you for the nice words also about the situation. One thing I want to mention about Syria and the photos from Holocaust. Every time, I think the difference that I got most of the time, when people they are more able to look at horrible photos from the history because they don't feel accountable. Because if they look at these photos, it's happening now. It's happening somewhere else, and it's under their watch. And that's why it's hard for them to look at them. That's my analysis. Because they can look, they go to Auschwitz, and they have the tour, and they visit, and they learn, and they have this in the history. But when they know that it's happening under their watch, it holds them accountable, and some people, they don't.
A powerful answer, and thanks for your honesty as well. When you were talking about that, it also and your art with the pictures lower down, it made me think of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, where they have little walls so the children can't look over, but then the worst images are the ones you look down at, and it just it makes you so conscious that you're looking, that you're gazing at someone's terrible situation. But I think what you say is absolutely right, because we're all complicit if we're not saying anything, and so it's easier to look at the historical stuff than the stuff that's going on. I think that's completely true, so thank you. Anyone else want to comment on these questions?
Maybe just on the question of hope, right? There's no easy answers to such a difficult question, such a simple but challenging question. I think just from an Impunity Watch perspective, then I think there's hope, particularly in the communities where we work, from the fact that there's that long-term engagement, right? There's that demonstrable commitment and solidarity that we have as an organization to be invested in those communities. It's not that we're not an organization that is kind of going wherever the wind blows. It's deep, long-term engagement in Guatemala, in Burundi, and the countries where we're based. And you see that is kind of at the very heart of the organization, that if we're going to be committed to the cause of victims in Guatemala or to supporting processes in Burundi, then we're all in, or we're nothing. So I think maybe there's hope from that kind of long-term engagement and solidarity. Beyond that, there's almost nothing we can do other than demonstrating that and sort of embodying that in all of the work that we do.
Yeah, I don't know if my advice is going to be relevant. However, in Bosnia right now, we actually do have a large groups of migrants and refugees from the Middle East. Unfortunately, the way they're mostly living in camps organized by usually IOM or other UN agencies. What I've learned, sort of just witnessing that type of work, I don't directly work with them, is what maybe helps keep the hope up is trying to remind them of what they're fighting for still. So trying to remind them of their own culture. I know that, for example, for a lot of people in refugee camps in Bosnia, that was through food. That was through painting and art workshops, through their own music. We've had there's a big project that was also done through fashion. So they've had refugees involved in trying to basically creating garments. Then they were later also the models on the runways. So it's those type of maybe little things that help them kind of maybe waking up the part of themselves that they've been trying to suppress, unfortunately, in the systems that they're coming from. But in countries such as this, they can be proud of it again, and that usually might be what helps them push forward.
Thanks for that answer, because I was thinking exactly the same. You know, the examples I've seen of sort of what I just call cultural activities, you know, like cooking classes, sport, these type of activities, they just offer people a different vehicle. So thank you. I think that's a great answer. Right, over there, and then over there, and then I'll have a time check. And we'll take your one, and then I think we'll cut it on those three. Sorry to do that, but.
Thanks. Yeah, first of all, congratulations. This was really very impressive presentations, and I think you did a fantastic job in 7 minutes. Congratulations. No, it's more a thought than a question, and it goes also into the whole issue of the pictures and self-care, because I'm a psychologist, that's where I'm coming from, and I was recently involved in a discussion. Sorry? No, can I book an appointment? Well, I was recently involved in a discussion around how we can protect people who actually have to look at the Caesar pictures professionally, and the difficulty and the impact it had on them, etc. And it made me think, because it also about, that was in a professional context, but I'm fascinated by your narrative about art, how it can reveal, but also how it can veil. Because also thinking about the Holocaust memorials, for instance, I was always fascinated by the difference, for instance, between, for instance, I saw the museum in Jerusalem, or the Yad Vashem, or the one in Berlin, how veiled it is still, if you look at the real. And then I worked in Rwanda, and I saw there are these genocide memorials, which were very, very brutal and direct, where you see the bodies and you smell, it's very sensory. And this always made me think, like, okay, what is the best way to show people so that they feel it and they sense it and they remember when they walk away, but they're not overwhelmed and there is no vicarious trauma. So I think what you did, or what you're showing with these loops and this kind of giving people the choice, also the element of control, of I can choose how much I engage with this, I think is fascinating. And there's certainly, from the art side, also ways to think about how to protect us in working with all this. So well done, congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Vanda. I'm from Track, Cambodia, and I'm here because of the support of Justice and Peace Netherlands. Actually, the speakers have done the best demonstration of pictures, information given. It's not easy to make me sad and want to cry, you know. I run to the bathroom because I want to cry. So you have done in a precise and clear information and picture given to us. But your work reminds me of my work 15 years in Cambodia, so it saddened me the most. And we feel like we are professional doctor. The perpetrator stab the victim in the eye, we run to replace the eye. They stab in the heart, we run to replace the heart. But could you answer my question? Can we do more than that? Can we do anything to stop perpetrator to torture the victim and go away with impunity? That is my question. Thank you.
It's a very powerful question. Made me also think a little bit of what you were saying. I'm trying to remember who wrote the book, but there's a really good book on the Holocaust. And it talks about how in a lot of the work that we do and that we're talking about, it draws us into the experience of the victim, which is important, and we can empathize. But how do we get drawn into the experience of being the perpetrator? realizing our own complicity, that we could be a perpetrator. And I think that that might touch a little bit on that. So I'm going to take 2 comments from the panel. So there's 2 more questions, and then we'll cut it there. Anyone want to comment? Bruce, no.
One of the things that I think is very difficult and very long-term, but is important, is criminal justice. And in Guatemala, we have supported and promoted, and one of the murals that you see of the Achi case is a result of the criminal proceedings. But it is a very long process, highly cost, and we can't always reach the higher commands. And I think, yeah, our biggest wish would be that those in power would not continue to be in power. And I think the victims search for justice. They want to end impunity using the criminal justice because they don't want the perpetrators to continue to have power. I think the political context today in Guatemala and the electoral process also show a different way in which people want to change that power dynamics so that those in power don't continue to have that power to continue to abuse victims or to continue to have these sort of crimes. So it's a very difficult thing to change. It's a very long-term thing to change. And I think in all of these countries, there might not be, in some of them, an official conflict going on, an official war going on, but they are still conflicting countries. So, and that's why in my presentation I wanted to say and highlight how international support is important to continue. This work is important to continue permanently and constantly in the different contexts because it is a permanent effort so that the narratives and the shifts in power and how we construct the countries, the normalization of militarization, of violence can change so that these sort of crimes will not happen again.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question and the reflections. 2 things. One is acknowledgement through education, and that is what we've been trying to do in the Balkans. And that is it's a rough process. It can be very, very raw. Really making people, and I'm saying it making. I'm not being violent in it, but making people face the histories of their family, of their local community, of their ethnic group. And it's a personal sort of process that we go through, and then communities also go through. It's a tough process, and it's the way you also said it needs to be a sustainable process. And finally, talking about something or thinking about something called moral responsibility, and that's a responsibility of all of us here, all of the friends behind the camera there online, to never let Srebrenica happen again, to not continue Syria happening still, or, well, to let the revolution happen. And it really starts on a very human and basic level in building up our empathy and our courage so that tomorrow when we see injustice happening in the street, we stand up for it. When we see someone in need, we help them. And in that way, we're building up our community and our society to be strong enough so that big atrocities like the 90s in the Western Balkans and Syria currently, and Ukraine currently, will be completely unimaginable. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry to say, but I've got the stop sign, and we have to be conscious of it being streamed. So I know there are 2 questions waiting, and I'm going to be terrible and not give you the opportunity to ask your questions. But we'll have time afterwards, and hopefully we can address them. So my sincere apologies for that. But because you both spoke, I'm going to give Khaled and Dave a chance to maybe make any comments. And then if either of you want to desperately say something, that's fine too. I sort of feeling here, looking down at my paper, and I need to ask about gender and art, and then we didn't get there. So I'm this like staring me in the face, and now I have the two men to answer that question. But some final comments from both of you, and then we will have more discussion.
About the gender, there's two, so I'm wearing two hats because I'm running cultural organization and also I have my artistic practice. With the cultural organization, it's easy because we can positively discriminate, right? So we can focus on artists, female artists, etc. So that's easy to do. With my work, it's a little bit difficult. Though, for example, with the mute, it's intentionally there was more female figures than male figures. Even the revolution, it doesn't, it's not like the reality on the street. Also, yeah, so this is, for example, one example of conscious decisions, how to focus on this. Yeah.
Anything else on the...
Yeah, I think, no, I just want to say, like, thank you so much for your words and for your tears. So basically, not thank you for your tears, like thank you for the empathy that led to that. No, I think what we can do is what we are trying to do, right? Like, so it's because we don't have the same evil force as the perpetrator to go and stab them, right? So we try to all the time to be reactionary, not actionary in this case, because also it's more tight. We have more tight hands because we try to follow the law and we try to be respectful and ethical in all what we are doing. So it becomes a little bit harder. But I think what for example, in situation of Syria or also other places, what all of us trying to do, what the victims trying to do, what Impunity Watch and other organizations trying to do. For example, in Syria, it's leading to some sort of justice, to find international mechanism that can bring Assad or others to justice.
Yeah, maybe just two final comments. First, to the question from the gentleman from Cambodia. I think it's such a powerful question, and we've tried to show a little bit in, for example, in a context like Burundi, where for the moment there's no chance of criminal justice. What can be the power of art in those contexts? And it can seem insignificant because it's only artistic. It comes back to something that we mentioned at the beginning, but I think there's a lot that boils down to power, right? And I think this is something that is kind of underlying the different discussions that we've been having when we're talking about art as potentially something that can dignify victims. There's a lot of power in that. It gives power back to victims. If you're talking about art to challenge the status quo, as I think everybody has mentioned, there's also a significant amount of power in that because it involves unsettling those narratives. It's again giving power back to victims or enabling them to take the power back for themselves. And I think this idea that we try to present from Burundi as the way that art can be used to develop mutual understanding across communities. It also diminishes the power of people in positions of power to be able to manipulate those people. And the final question, also related to gender, is also something to do with power, right? It's that we often see in a lot of contexts that we talk about the meta-narratives, the way that narratives are imposed, but there's also power within that often those narratives are scripted by men. And so I think a lot of the work that we try to do as Impunity Watch is to make sure that we're giving adequate attention above and beyond what is necessary to make sure that we're very conscious of power dynamics in terms of masculinities, in terms of how women are participating in different processes and how that interplays with the different processes that we're trying to develop and how it interacts with the different processes that we try to establish for dealing with the past. So it's front and center in everything that we do. It's 50% on the panel, which is a good indication. But yeah, I think it boils down to a lot of power.
Like very last word.
Of course.
That really very last sentence. I was just thinking about this. I didn't think it through, but through your question, we definitely should, like in general, focus on gender perspective. But I think when we talk about victimhood, I'm not really sure if I feel comfortable focusing on one gender more than the others, because I think the amount of pain is not measurable in this way. And also, like, for example, when we read news, a plane crashed, and they mention how many kids, how many females, and there's sometimes something related to the male pain, I think, that need to be spoke about, because I feel sometimes there's no space for it enough, at least in our societies, like where I come from. And there's a lot of emphasis on, of course, which I understand, I have my full, like, that's what I do all the time. But I just want to mention this, it just make me feel, think of how can we measure pain, and of course focusing again in oppressed community at first place is important, but when we talk about pain, I think it's very fundamental that it should have no gender. Yeah, I don't know.
And like so many of these things, we're now just getting into it, right? So we were just getting started there, and I'm going to have to close it off. But thank you, and I just want to thank the panel for an absolutely excellent discussion and presentations, and for obeying the time and putting so much into it. So I think in the sort of traditional way, the best thing to do is just give them a round of applause. So thank you. We're coming to the end of proceedings, and Marlies is going to come back to the stage shortly. But I'm going to abuse my privilege one more time, and this is very, very important, because Marlies is not going to do this. So I feel I need to do this as a board member of Impunity Watch. And firstly is to congratulate everybody who works for Impunity Watch, and the partners that Impunity Watch works with, and the funders who support Impunity Watch, and the network of people and the families and the community who are part of Impunity Watch, because there is such brilliant work that is done by this organization. And for me, I'm just really proud to be part of this organization. And so I just wanted to formally say that, and to thank all of you and the victims and the survivors. And it sounds very hollow because we're talking about such big communities and countries, but it's really important. And thank you all for coming here tonight. And the bit that Marlies would not say is, I want to thank Marlies, because she is a founding member. This was her passion. If we were in Silicon Valley, we would call her an entrepreneur. She was a guiding spirit to move this organization forward. So I wanted to officially thank you. And just to make sure that that's not to minimize the work of everybody else, Marlies doesn't do it by herself. And somebody mentioned the dancing, and for me, I was trying to think of what's like a fitting quote I can use at the end, and the most ridiculous quote came into my mind. And so I have to qualify it, because I have fun when I'm working with Impunity Watch, right? Which makes me sound like I definitely need that therapist as well. But I have fun because I'm with like-minded people, and there's a culture, and you're sharing, and you're trying to solve problems together. And for me, it's a very distorted idea of fun. But the quote that came to mind, and I was thinking of Marlies, is from Winnie the Pooh. And Winnie the Pooh, the little bear that many of you know, at some point, Winnie the Pooh says, "I didn't know we were making memories. I thought we were just having fun." And so it made me think of you, Marlies. So thank you.
You see why we all want to have a board member like Brendan. I'm not accustomed to receive these kind of words. I'm deeply appreciative of it. And as Brendan said, you know, it's not just me. We have an amazing organization. My colleagues who work in the field, it's just amazing what they do. And I think it's important to also highlight that it's program staff, but it's also the organizational staff. Running an NGO these days, human rights organizations, and I started our retreat this week with that, is quite a complicating thing. There's so many challenges, right, that try to move us to become entrepreneurs, that try to move us into becoming a business. And so what we try to do at Impunity Watch is to remain having a heart, you know, to do this from the drive of being, having humanity, and to really, you know, to see people, and from there making the connections and making long-term commitments of solidarity. And I think you get so much back of that, and I think that's why we have fun. I think that's where we get our strength, and why we'll continue, you know, for the years to come. And I'm deeply grateful to my team. I'm deeply grateful to my board. I'm deeply grateful to all of you, our friends, our supporters, our colleagues. You know, it's a community. And I think if we feel like a community, if we feel that this is a joint work, then alternatives are possible. We need to be a bit utopian in this rotten world, you know, that alternatives are possible. So that's really what I hope, you know, that we've managed to bring forward at this event. And I think what I really liked about the panel, and why I thought it was important to have people from different contexts and to do it with art, because it touches you in the heart, right? When you see the art, it's so powerful, and it shows the humanity, it shows the suffering, it shows the need for compassion, and it shows the need that we cannot sit idly by. We need to work together to address this. And I think the pictures, you know, show the difference of how that looks like in Burundi, how that looks in Guatemala, how that looks in the Western Balkans, how that looks in Syria. And so I'm very grateful for your fantastic presentations, and I think we did something important here. But we're not yet done, because there's something very important still waiting for us. As I told you, we have Minal here, our Sri Lankan artist, and she's been doing some live art work with us. She's been listening to all of us. I'm really now curious to see if you managed to make something out of that. And so we'll listen to her poem right now. Minal.
Hi, everyone. I want to say thank you to Impunity Watch for having me, and Justice for Peace for actually bringing me here to the Netherlands. Just before I get into it, I just want to say justice is a very contested word, at least from where I live in Sri Lanka. This seems like almost a pipe dream. Justice to me, as a woman living in a very patriarchal society, this is something that sometimes feels like a dream. So when I was asked to do this poem, I actually said, 5 years ago I wrote a poem, and that was called The Word I Hate the Most, which was justice. So I think in a way this has been very cathartic for me. So I'll just go ahead. For some, justice seems like an elusive dream, a word thrown around without a cause, a distraction from the impunity that stifles even the smallest cry, an empty word. For others, it means respecting human dignity, holding tyrants accountable. No one is above the rule of law. It means listening. My hope is that we build strong communities, build homes for the displaced, respect freedom of expression. Every citizen on earth is treated equally. In this utopic world, we all have agency. Together, we can work towards a sustainable world. Justice begins with you and I. Justice begins with me.
Thank you so much, Minal. For someone who doesn't believe in the word justice, I think you just summarized it perfectly. That was brilliant and very powerful. And I think you should give your poem to us, and I think we should share it with everyone. And I think we'll put it above our beds. And I think it will become the summary of our values as Impunity Watch. So thank you very much. So I think with this, we are ending the formal part of our event. So I think for the live stream, we can now disconnect it. I would like to thank the people who've been listening to us online for their participation. I hope next time you can join us here in person as well. and really very grateful for your participation at this very important event for Impunity Watch.